My friends, for 30 days, I became the accountant of my own life. Now that may sound unusual, but stay with me. I decided to take one of the most powerful ideas Jim Rohn ever taught, the habit ledger, and live it, not just admire it. You see, most people love good ideas, they love philosophy, they love inspiration, but very few ever take a principle and run it through the factory of their daily life. And that's where the magic happens. One day I asked myself a simple, unsettling question. What would happen if I treated every choice, every action, every habit as a financial transaction? What if every small discipline counted as a deposit and every small neglect counted as a debit? What if I stopped thinking about growth and actually started tracking it? That, my friends, is when the experiment began. And let me tell you, it wasn't the big things that shocked me. Oh, no. It was the quiet patterns, the little moments, the tiny decisions that slipped through the cracks of a busy day. Jim Rohn used to say, success is a few simple disciplines practiced every day, and failure is a few small errors in judgment repeated every day. I wanted to see that truth on paper. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So for 30 days, I became the bookkeeper of my own potential. No emotion, no judgment, just the facts. Every action went into the ledger. Every win, every lapse, every moment of discipline, every quiet moment of drift. And I discovered something remarkable. You don't need a life overhaul to change your future. You just need to understand the math of your habits. Because here's what Jim taught. The ledger is always running. Whether you're aware of it or not, life is keeping score. The question is, are you keeping score? Are you paying attention to what your habits are building or what they're burning? Over the next 8 sections, I'm going to walk you through exactly what I learned in those 30 days, how awareness created change, how tiny deposits grew into momentum, and how the ledger revealed the truth long before the results ever appeared. But before we go there, let this introduction set the stage. I didn't do anything heroic. I didn't set out to conquer mountains. I simply tracked my choices like money in and money out. And the clarity that came from that one decision changed everything. My friends, when you understand your ledger, you understand your life. And once you understand your life, you can finally begin to change it. Before I take you into the 30-day journey itself, my friends, we need to pause and understand the philosophy that powered it. Because if you misunderstand the principle, you will misunderstand the results. And Jim Rohn was very clear. Philosophy is the foundation of your life. Get the philosophy right, and everything else follows. Get it wrong, and everything else fights you. So let's talk about the ledger. Jim used to say, life is a ledger, always open, always recording, always balancing. And that idea is much deeper than it sounds. Because most people think of life like a wish list, or a vague hope, or a collection of someday dreams. But life doesn't operate on wishes. Life operates on math, on inputs and outputs, on deposits and debits. Every choice you make is a transaction. Think about that. Every minute you invest in discipline and a deposit. Every minute you lose to neglect, a debit. Every page you read, a deposit. Every excuse you repeat, a debit. And the ledger doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It doesn't care about your mood, your circumstances, or your intentions. It simply records what is. That was the first truth I had to face. The ledger doesn't record what you meant to do. It only records what you did. Now that can be uncomfortable because we love our intentions, don't we? We love the idea of effort more than the effort itself. But the ledger only counts actions, and actions repeated over time become habits, and habits, my friend, become your identity. That's the math of the human experience. Jim also taught another great truth. The ledger is neutral. It will reward you or punish you with equal enthusiasm. It doesn't care whether you're accumulating discipline or accumulating drift. It simply compounds whatever you consistently feed it. You save $1 a day, the ledger smiles. You waste $1 a day, the ledger still smiles. It's not emotional. It's not biased. It's not personal. It just multiplies your behavior. So before I began my 30-day experiment, I had to adopt that mindset. No excuses, no stories, no emotional coloring, just the numbers. I had to accept that the ledger was already running whether I checked it or not. And I had to become willing to look at the balance honestly. That's the beginning of growth, the courage to see things as they are. And here's the beautiful part. Once you embrace the ledger principle, you take back control. Because suddenly, your future isn't a mystery. It becomes a simple equation. Small disciplines equals deposits, accumulated progress. Small neglects equals debits, accumulated regret. So before we dive into the practical journey, understand this. The ledger principle is not about guilt. It's about clarity. Not about shame. It's about awareness. Not about perfection. It's about accountability. Once you understand the ledger, you understand why life adds up the way it does. And once you understand that, you're ready to step into the first real stage of transformation. And that's exactly where we go next. Before the journey could begin, before the first deposit was ever made, I had to build the ledger itself. And let me tell you, my friends, this step was more important than I realized. Because Jim Rohn always said, don't start the day until it's finished on paper. The same is true for a month. Before you start living it, you must design it. So I sat down with a notebook, nothing fancy, just a simple place to keep score. Because that's all the ledger really is, a scoreboard for your habits. A clear, honest place where yesterday's excuses can't hide and tomorrow's intentions can't pretend. I divided the ledger into 5 categories, 5 areas where every one of us makes daily choices. Health, your energy, your body, your vitality. Wealth and work, your craft, your skills, your ambition. Personal growth, reading, learning, expanding your mind. Relationships, the deposits you make in people. Character and discipline, the promises you keep with yourself. These, my friends, are the 5 great accounts of life. And every day we either add to them or subtract from them. Once the categories were set, I made a simple rule for myself. Every action must be small enough to do daily and clear enough to measure. No, work out more. No, learn something new. No, be better with people. Too vague, too emotional, too soft. Life doesn't respond to cloudy goals. It responds to clear commitments. So I wrote tiny, measurable habits. Little things, almost embarrassingly small. Walk 15 minutes. Read 10 pages. Plan tomorrow in 5 minutes. Send 1 message of appreciation. Track the day honestly. Why so small? Because small habits are the only habits you can repeat every day. And Jim Rohn said it best. Discipline is the foundation. Make it easy to build, hard to break. Then came the final preparation step. I made a promise not to be perfect, but to be accurate. No lying, no inflating, no rounding up or rounding down. If I read 9 pages, it wasn't 10. If I wasted 15 minutes, it wasn't just a moment. The ledger only works when the truth is in the numbers. And once the categories were set, the habits defined, and the rules established, something remarkable happened. I felt calm, clear, in control. Not because I had changed anything yet, but because I finally had a plan. Jim taught that life responds to clarity. And for the first time, I had clarity. I knew what mattered, I knew what counted, and I knew exactly how to measure it. My friends, preparation is not a formality, it is the first deposit. And with the ledger built, the categories defined, and the rules in place, the 30-day journey was ready to begin. And that brings us to the next stage. The first week, when the first week began, my friends, I thought I was ready. After all, I had my categories, my habits, my clean ledger. I felt organized, motivated, even optimistic. But let me tell you, the first week isn't about discipline. It's about honesty. And honesty, when you write it down, has a way of humbling even the most confident student. On day 1, I wrote my habits as if everything were already in perfect order. 15-minute walk, easy. 10 pages of reading? Of course. 5-minute plan for tomorrow? No problem. And for the first few hours, I behaved exactly like the person I wished I always was. But, my friends, here's what I discovered. It's not hard to live well for a morning. What's hard is measuring what happens in the cracks of the day. Somewhere around late afternoon, I reached for my phone. Just a minute, I told myself. You know that line. 1 minute became 3, 3 became 10, and when I finally looked back at the ledger, I realized I had just added a debit. Not a dramatic one, just a small one, a quiet one. But that's the whole point. The ledger captures the smallness of habit, the things we normally ignore. And by day 3, the truth started showing up. A missed walk here, a skipped reading session there, a longer than admitted distraction, a shorter than hoped effort, little debits, little leaks, little errors in judgment. Jim Rohn used to say, failure is nothing more than a few small errors in judgment repeated every day. And suddenly, I could see my errors not as moral failures, but as mathematical realities. That was the wake-up call. The first week showed me something profound. Most people don't fail because of one big mistake. They drift because of 1,000 tiny ones. And because they never measure those tiny moments, they never understand how momentum is lost. They think their life is shaped by major events. But life is shaped by the things we never pay attention to. There was a moment around day 5 when I felt frustrated with myself. I thought, why am I making so many debits? I'm trying. And then the Rohn philosophy whispered back, the ledger doesn't care what you're trying to do. It only records what you're actually doing. That one line softened my frustration and sharpened my awareness. By the end of week 1, I had accumulated more debits than deposits. But instead of discouragement, I began feeling something else. Clarity. Because for the first time, the fog had lifted. I wasn't guessing anymore. I could finally see what was happening with my days. Not what I wanted to happen, but what truly happened. And that, my friends, is the whole purpose of the first week. Not to impress yourself. Not to prove anything. But to face the truth on paper. Because until you see the truth, you can't correct the truth. And until you correct the truth, nothing changes. Week 1 wasn't pretty, but it was honest. And Jim Rohn would say honesty is the first step toward greatness. The ledger had done its job. It showed me where I was. Now it was time for week 2, where small adjustments begin to turn awareness into progress. By the time week 2 arrived, I understood something important. The ledger wasn't the problem, my habits were. And the beauty of habits is this. Habits can be changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but gradually. Deposit by deposit. Choice by choice. Entry by entry. Jim Rohn would say, you don't have to change your whole life in a day. You only have to change the next choice. That became the theme of week 2. Now, here's what I learned almost immediately. You cannot eliminate a debit by wishing it away. You replace it strategically, intentionally, with a deposit. So I looked at the patterns from week 1. What were my most common debits? A few minutes of aimless scrolling, a tendency to skip reading when the day felt long, planning tomorrow after the day had worn me out, eating whatever was convenient instead of what was wise. Little things. Tiny leaks, nearly invisible, but visible enough, once measured, to begin repairing. So in week 2, instead of fighting my weaknesses, I simply swapped them with small strengths. Here's an example. When I noticed I kept grabbing my phone in the afternoons, I didn't give myself a lecture. I didn't vow to never touch the phone again. No, too dramatic, too emotional, too unrealistic. Instead, I said, before I scroll, I must walk for 5 minutes. And suddenly, the debit became a deposit. Not through punishment, but through replacement. Another example. On nights when I was too tired to read 10 pages, I didn't demand 10. I demanded 1. Just 1 page. Because 1 page is still a deposit. And 1 page often opens the door to 2 or 3 or 10. Jim Rohn taught the principle perfectly. Don't start with discipline. Start with design. If your environment pushes you toward debits, redesign the environment. If your habits fail at the end of the day, move them to the beginning. If your energy dips at 3 in the afternoon, don't fight it. Prepare for it. So during week 2, I learned to design my day around tiny deposits that were nearly impossible to skip. Not big habits. Not heroic habits. Just small, consistent, repeatable habits. And something remarkable began to happen. The ratio improved. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But noticeably. There were still debits, of course. There always will be. But now the deposits started to match them, and then slowly outperformed them. And here's a Jim Rohn truth worth remembering. You don't need to eliminate every debit, you just need more deposits than withdrawals. Just like money, just like health, just like wisdom, just like life. By the end of week 2, I was no longer frustrated with the ledger. I was motivated by it. Because the ledger wasn't criticizing me, it was guiding me. It wasn't judging me, it was coaching me. It wasn't exposing my failures, it was revealing my next opportunities. And that, my friends, is the gift of the adjustment week. Awareness becomes improvement. Improvement becomes momentum. Momentum becomes hope. And hope fuels the next part of the journey, where discipline meets resistance, and resistance gives birth to the turning point. That brings us to week 3, where the quiet battle becomes a quiet breakthrough. By the time week 3 arrived, something interesting began to happen, something subtle, something quiet, something Jim Rohn talked about often. He'd say, once you get going, life has a way of helping you keep going. That's momentum. But he'd also say, everything in life has its opposite force. That's resistance. And in week 3, I met both. On one hand, the small daily deposits from week 2 began taking root. I didn't have to remind myself to walk. I didn't have to force myself to read. I didn't have to negotiate my way into planning tomorrow. These habits, tiny as they were, had begun to shift from effort to rhythm. And rhythm is powerful. Rhythm gives you lift. Rhythm removes friction. Rhythm lets discipline glide instead of grind. But then, almost as if life were testing me, the resistance arrived. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, in the form of fatigue, distraction, unexpected interruptions, emotional dips, the kind of resistance that whispers, you've done enough, right when the ledger needs one more deposit. Jim Rohn taught that resistance is not a sign you're failing, it's a sign you're advancing. And that's exactly what week 3 became, a test of advancement. Let me tell you what helped me pass that test. The turning point audit. This is a Jim Rohn classic. It's the moment you stop running on emotion and start running on truth. It's the moment you bring your habits into the light and say, what is actually holding me back? What patterns are costing me progress? What little leaks have I ignored? Here's how the audit worked. One quiet evening in week 3, I sat down with my ledger, 13 days of deposits and debits. No fanfare, no pressure, just a calm, honest look at the numbers. And I asked myself 3 questions. 1, what's the habit that's helping me the most? Because we must know our strengths to protect them. 2, what's the habit that's hurting me the most? Because small leaks sink big ships. 3, what's the habit I've been avoiding? Because avoidance is where potential hides. In that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. My biggest struggle wasn't discipline, it was distraction. Not hours of distraction, just minutes. Scattered, harmless-looking minutes that added up to a surprising debit. The ledger told the truth long before my emotions would have admitted it. And here was the turning point. Once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. And once I couldn't unsee it, I could finally change it. So I made a new rule for myself. Simple, clear, powerful. No phone before the first deposit is made. Not a dramatic rule, just a smart one. But that one adjustment cut my debits nearly in half. That's the beauty of the turning point audit. You don't need to fix everything. You just need to identify one key debit and turn it into one consistent deposit. By the end of week 3, momentum was no longer fragile, it was forming. Resistance was no longer an obstacle, it was feedback. And my ledger was no longer a scoreboard, it was a compass. Week 3 taught me this. Discipline begins in week 2, but identity begins in week 3. Because when you overcome resistance, even in small ways, something inside you shifts. You begin to see yourself differently. You begin to trust yourself more. You begin to say, maybe I can do this, not once, but daily. And that trust, the trust you build with yourself, becomes the doorway to the next stage of the journey, where consistency stops feeling forced and starts feeling natural. That, my friends, is where we enter week 4, the week where compounding truly begins. By the time week 4 arrived, my friends, something extraordinary happened. Extraordinary not because it was loud, but because it was quiet. You see, real transformation rarely announces itself. It doesn't knock on the door with fireworks. No, real growth slips in through the back door, almost unnoticed, until one day you realize something has changed. That's what compounding does. And in week 4, compounding finally took over. Up until this point, discipline had required effort, attention, intention, sometimes even negotiation. But by week 4, many of the habits I struggled with in week 1 had become natural, almost automatic. Not because I had become stronger, but because consistency had begun to carry its own weight. Let me tell you one thing. Jim Rohn taught that I felt deeply this week. Discipline weighs ounces. Regret weighs tons. By week 4, the ounces began to feel lighter and the regret began to fade. Suddenly, the walk that felt like a chore in week 1 became the thing I looked forward to. The reading that felt forced became a quiet pleasure. The planning that seemed unnecessary became the anchor of my day. The ledger wasn't something I had to fill, it was something I wanted to fill. That's the quiet breakthrough of consistency. What starts as discipline becomes identity. And let me share something even more interesting. The results I began to see in week 4 didn't come from the last 7 days. They came from the first 7 days. The awkward days, the messy days, the honest days, the days full of debits. That's compounding. The harvest delayed is still the harvest earned. In week 4, I noticed 3 major changes. 1, my energy changed, not dramatically, but steadily. I felt lighter, clearer, more in motion. That's what happens when the body begins banking more deposits than debits. 2, my confidence changed, not the loud kind of confidence, the quiet kind. The confidence that comes from keeping small promises to yourself. Jim Rohn called this reputation with yourself. And by week 4, my reputation with myself had gone up a few notches. 3, my perspective changed. I stopped thinking in terms of big goals, and I started thinking in terms of small deposits. Small deposits felt achievable. Small deposits felt reliable. Small deposits felt like something I could own. And when small deposits become your focus, guess what happens? You stop being intimidated by the size of your dreams and start being encouraged by the size of your next step. That, my friends, is the great miracle of compounding. It works quietly until suddenly it works loudly. It moves slowly until suddenly it moves quickly. It feels invisible until one day the results are undeniable. Week 4 taught me this priceless lesson. Your life doesn't change when you set a big goal. Your life changes when your daily deposits reach critical mass. And in that 4th week, the mass had finally tipped. The seesaw moved. The balance shifted. The math began working for me instead of against me. But the journey didn't end with momentum. Momentum is a gift. Yes. But wisdom comes from reflection. And that leads us to the next part of this journey, where numbers become knowledge and habits become insight. Because after 30 days, I discovered 3 great lessons Jim Rohn had been teaching all along, and now I had lived them myself. When the 30 days were complete, my friends, I didn't just have a notebook full of check marks and numbers. I had something far more valuable, clarity. Because those 30 days weren't simply a challenge, they were a classroom. And in that classroom, the ledger taught me 3 great lessons. Lessons Jim Rohn had been teaching for decades, yet somehow they land differently when you live them. Let's walk through them carefully. These are the lessons that change the course of a life, not in one giant leap, but in small, steady steps. Lesson 1, small habits are the only habits that matter. For years I thought success required incredible effort, big effort, dramatic effort, the kind of effort that makes movies and headlines. But after 30 days of recording every deposit and every debit, I discovered something surprising. It wasn't the big decisions that moved my life forward. It was the tiny ones. 10 pages of reading, a 15-minute walk, a 3-minute review of the day, a single act of kindness. One moment of discipline instead of distraction. Individually, each of these looked insignificant. Collectively, they changed my entire direction. Jim Rohn said, "Success is neither magical nor mysterious. Success is the natural consequence of consistently applying basic fundamentals." And 30 days of visible math proved him right. The big habits get the attention. The small habits get the results. Lesson 2. Your life changes when your identity changes, and identity changes through action, not intention. Some people think you need inspiration to become someone new. They think you need motivation, or a breakthrough, or a moment of lightning. But the Ledger taught me something different. You don't grow because you feel ready. You grow because you act daily. Every time I completed a deposit, I wasn't just improving the day. I was improving the way I saw myself. A person who reads, a person who moves their body, a person who plans, a person who keeps promises, even small ones. Identity doesn't change in a flash of inspiration. It changes when your actions become consistent enough for your mind to say, this is who we are now. That's why Jim Rohn used to say, don't set your goals too low. You don't want to become less than you could become. Because when your identity rises, your life rises with it. And identity rises from consistent behavior. Not someday, not occasionally, but daily. Lesson 3, the ledger never lies, but it always helps you. This might be the most powerful lesson of all. Most people don't grow because they lie to themselves softly, gently, quietly. I didn't waste that much time. I did most of what I said I would. I'm doing better than I think. Or sometimes, I'm doing worse than I think. But the ledger removes the fantasy. It gives you the truth. Clean, neutral, unemotional. On the days I did well, it celebrated with me. On the days I slipped, it revealed it without judgment. And on the days I avoided responsibility, it waited patiently for the truth. Jim Rohn taught what gets measured gets improved. But I learned something even deeper. What gets measured gets honest. And what gets honest gets better. The ledger didn't shame me. It trained me. It coached me. It taught me to see the invisible forces shaping my life. And here's the real revelation. The ledger was never about the 30 days. It was about the 30 years. Because once you understand your habits, you understand your future. And once you understand your future, you can shape it deliberately, intelligently, consistently. These 3 lessons weren't theories. They were lived, felt, experienced. The small habits mattered. Identity grew from daily action. The ledger told the truth, and the truth set me free. And now, my friends, it is time for the final part of this journey. The conclusion to these 30 days, and the invitation for you to begin your own. My friends, as we come to the close of this 30-day journey, let me leave you with the most important insight of all. Your ledger is already running. Whether you acknowledge it or not, every day you are making deposits, and every day you are making debits. Life is keeping score. Time is keeping score. Your habits are keeping score. The question is, are you keeping score? For 30 days, I tracked every little choice, every walk, every page, every distraction, every plan, and I learned this. Your life doesn't change when you dream big dreams. Your life changes when you take small actions. The deposits, not once in a while, but daily. So let me speak to you directly. You don't need a massive transformation tomorrow. You don't need heroic discipline. You don't need perfect consistency. You don't need a brand new identity. You just need one simple thing, a beginning, one small deposit today, one fewer debit, one clearer intention, one step toward designing your days instead of drifting through them. Jim Rohn would say, start where you are, do what you can. Never underestimate the power of a small start. And in that spirit, I want to invite you to begin your own ledger today. Not someday. Pick one habit, just one. Make it tiny. Make it measurable. Make it daily. Walk 5 minutes. Read 1 page. Plan tomorrow for 2 minutes. Speak kindness once a day. Anything small enough that you cannot talk yourself out of it. And then record it. That's it. Don't judge it. Don't dramatize it. Just write it down. Because the moment you begin keeping score, you begin taking control. The moment you record your day begins to change. The moment you track your habits begin to shift. The moment you see the truth, your future becomes yours again. And if you make those deposits day after day, something extraordinary will happen. Not loud, not sudden, but quiet and powerful and unmistakable. Consistency will begin to compound. Your confidence will rise. Your energy will strengthen. Your identity will transform. And one day, not far from now, you'll look at your ledger and say, I did this, one small deposit at a time. My friends, the ledger of your life is open. The balance is always changing. The future is being shaped little by the habits you choose today. So ask yourself, before you go to bed tonight, what deposit did I make today? And what deposit will I make tomorrow? If you can answer those 2 questions each day, with honesty and commitment, there will come a time when the compound effect will reward you beyond anything you imagined. Until then, keep making your daily deposits. Keep growing your account. Keep building the life only you can build. The best is yet to come.